One of the most tried and true storytelling methods throughout all of history is the whodunit. Who committed the crime? Who killed the person? And we are talking about, in this week's review, the latest whodunit to hit the big screen, Death on the Nile. I am Cody. Across the internet from me is my co-reviewer, Zach. We just saw this movie, and I have to be honest, I was pretty delighted with my experience, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good follow-up to Murder on the Orient Express.
I guess we can do a brief synopsis. No spoilers. Don't worry about turning off the podcast or anything. We're not going to do spoilers in this one. So anyways, a wedding happens between Gal Gadot and her husband, and they go on this trip through Egypt. And in order to get away from an ex-lover, they go on this boat. Mm-hmm. And the wedding party's there, and Hercule Peirot is there, basically to kind of keep an eye on things. And then things take a turn for the worst, and somebody dies, and then Poirot is into full swing of, I must solve this mystery, and, antics ensue. And so the title is essentially what the movie is. A death happens on the Nile River during this wedding party. This movie is like you said, the tried and true whodunit movie. This is a classic film, noir, film, detective style movie through and through. This is an Agatha Christie adaptation. For those who haven't read Agatha Christie, this is in her wheelhouse. This is what she does. She writes mystery novels, throws a bunch of characters at you, all with motives. At the end, kind of explains who did it. And her flagship detective is, I'm going to butcher this name because it's a French name. It's Hercule Peirot. And
that's good.
You kind of choke on it when you say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a movie for people who enjoy mysteries, who enjoy a kind of a wide cast of characters that all have unique backgrounds. And in her stories, especially, she likes to have characters that have either interesting professions or are related to the murdered character in a special way or a unique way that raises suspicion. And that's kind of what this is all about. So for anybody who's kind of a paranoid person, this might be up your alley because you just kind of suspect everybody when these kind of movies come out. But this is a classic, man. This is a classic, and I don't mean a classic film, but I mean a classic storytelling style. Even more classic than maybe a Knives Out, because a Knives Out kind of takes its own unique twist on the mystery genre. So those who are thinking like, oh, Knives Out came out, it's just the same thing. It's kind of, but it's Agatha Christie, so it's more true to form. It's very structured. And so, man, I think those that enjoy, maybe not horror mystery, because there's always like an element of mystery in horror, like who's the monster kind of deal. This is more of the Scooby-Doo-esque of like who was the person at the end that they're going to reveal. Yeah, this movie definitely, and what it does is it takes a wide cast of characters, puts them all in a situation, gives you kind of like this claustrophobic tension because you know the wrongdoer is in the midst and you have to figure out who is going to survive, who's it going to be. And it's a fun movie because you are actively involved in trying to figure out the mystery as the story goes on, which makes these type of stories really fun, right? Because you feel like you're participating in it just as much as you're watching it. And let's talk about the strengths, things we think it did well, and what we think audiences, viewers who are thinking about going to see this will like about it. And I'll just start off and say that the performances are pretty good across the board. There are some who are better than others, but the film's main character, Hercule Peirot, carried by Kenneth Branagh, also the director of the film, he really does a great job, and I think an even better job in this movie than his first go at it in Murder on the Orient Express. But Zach, what did you think about the performances, the characters, and what are some other things you think were strong in this movie? Yeah, I think generally across the board, the acting was great. But I mean, Hercule Poirot was phenomenal, man. I was kind of telling you before, like there's certain scenes where he gets choked up, or like you feel that emotion, like he really embodies that. And I was like, man, I haven't seen someone really lean into a character like that, honestly, in a long time. I'm not saying like the other A-list actors in Hollywood are, not leaning into their characters, but it's been a while since I've seen a kind of a tragic character really realize they're a little bit of a tragedy. And so I enjoyed that aspect of it. I think the setting was awesome. I mean, how many Egyptian setting movies that are actually good do we get? I really enjoyed it. It was beautifully shot. I mean, those orange and reds that you get in the film, the sunrises and sunsets, you really get a picture of, what maybe the 1930s would have been on the Nile if you were fabulously wealthy.
Right.
I mean, that boat was ridiculous. I mean, it rivals Jeff Bezos's super yacht at this point. I mean, that thing was insane. But yeah, I thought the performances were awesome. I loved the setting. But I think if we can kind of dip into some drawbacks to the movie, is kind of that flip side of that coin with the performances. I mean, it's kind of a two-sided coin, double-edged sword. There was some and this is kind of what happens when you just have a huge cast. You're gonna have the people that really carry the movie. I mean, hopefully it's your main character. So in this case, Perot, he's the one carrying most of it. But I feel like when you are struggling a little bit in your role, it really gets magnified on the screen when it's not an action movie, when it's basically dialogue, which is what a true mystery film is. It's a lot of talking, a lot of problem solving, interviewing. He interviews a lot of people, and that's what keeps that tension. And I think if you are not a strong actor in your character, that really, really shows. And so there are a handful of characters, because this is a huge cast. There's a handful of characters that I think that it just didn't really deliver. And maybe that's because they didn't have that strong background that some of the leading characters had. I think in the book there's like 15 or 16 characters, and so over the course of a novel you can really flesh out a character. But when you have 8 to 9 characters on a screen, I mean, you kind of just go with an emotion, and you're like, okay, this is the angry person, and this is the jealous person. And so I feel like you kind of lose a sense of character development when they just get boiled down to an emotion like that. But I don't know. What do you think, man? What was kind of a weakness of the movie?
Yeah, I would say that for me, one of the weaknesses was I felt like because it is a murder mystery, I thought that it took a little bit long to really get into the meat of the story. I thought it took a little bit too much time to get off the ground and going. It has a lot of setup, and if you go to see this movie and you hear that we enjoyed it and we recommend it, and you go there and you're like, man, this is taking forever, I will say that it does take a little bit of time to get going, and some of the subplots are not as interesting as the main plot going on. And even though I would say they're all kind of necessary for the conclusion of the story and for the character development of a detective, and that's another thing about the movie, is it's not just another murder mystery, but it actually is trying to give some type of character development to the main protagonist, Hercule Poirot. And that's a cool thing. It's really setting itself up to be a series that can have many installments, and we'll see if after this one, if there will be a third installment in Kenneth Branagh's projects of Hercule Poirot. But yeah, I thought some of the subplots were a little slow. They took away from the movie a little bit. Even though they were kind of necessary, they just felt like they were forced in more than organically developed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. I think that just when you have that wide cast, so many people on screen, that yeah, having those subplots, it's hard to have honestly more than two in a mystery novel or a mystery film. Just because you have, you know, the main mystery happening, and then you want to develop that main characters, you want people to attach to Poirot especially, or whoever that main detective is. But yeah, I think they threw a little too many in there, and they wanted you to care about a lot of people, and at the end you really only care about two or three. So I mean, what did you think? I kind of want to go back a little bit at the very beginning with the war scene. Do you think so? I haven't seen Murder on the Orient Express, but do they do kind of like a background of Poirot? Because I've seen the old Orient Express. Like, I can't remember who directed it, but it was the older version, and I can't really remember if they did a background. You just kind of knew Poirot was the detective. But what do you did they have that in the old one? Or
so they don't have
Orient
any.
Express?
They don't have any flashback scenes, and this is the first scene of the movie, so this isn't a huge spoiler.
No,
but they just develop his love life more in Death on the Nile. But they talk about her in the first one. There's no flashback scenes, but she's talked about. Is it Katarine? Okay. I believe her name is.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. My larger question to you, which I mentioned before, was: could this be a gateway to potentially more mystery movies? I mean, we've had Knives Out, we've had now Death on the Nile, Murder on the Orient Express. So we've had a handful of mystery movies come out in the past 2 years, 3 years. Is there room in Hollywood for a mystery resurgence?
You know, I hope that there is, because there's so many good mystery tales, right? We have the Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie, Chronicles of all of those. You have Sherlock Holmes. And I believe that the whodunit, the mystery, is a good storytelling device, and I hope that it can. We'll see. I think if this movie can make good money, it's a good sign, right? Because it's a sequel to a movie that was pretty middle of the road as far as its reception. But Murder on the Orient Express did make a good amount of money. I believe it made like $350 million at the box office. And I don't think these are super duper expensive movies to make, but I think that if this can be successful, it can kind of show like there is a market for it. And the reason why I say there's a market for mystery is because when we think about popular stories and what really drew us into them, I think of the sensation of Game of Thrones, right? The first season is essentially a murder mystery, right? The whole first book, Game of Thrones, is a murder mystery in a fantasy world with a bunch of political intrigue. It's super complex, but the glue of it is in that murder mystery. You know, my wife and I just went through Harry Potter, and she had never seen him before. But what really gets you as an adult into Harry Potter is the mystery aspect. Every book is kind of like a detective novel in a, you know, fantasy wizarding world. And so that's a big reason why I think so many adults liked reading Harry Potter, because they're very like entry level mysteries, and they're quick reads, they're fun, and if you had it figured out by the end, you'll feel really gratified, but most people didn't. You know, there was always a surprise. And I think that's another big thing with these as well, is I think the conclusion matters so much, like executing a good conclusion. And I think that with Death on the Nile, I think the conclusion is good. The ending is a little bit, I will say a little bit of melodramatic, but I will say that watching Poirot deduce the mystery is just, to me, just satisfying. I enjoy it. The performance is great. I think you'll have a good time in the movie, but I do think there's a market for it, and I do recommend seeing this. I give it a thumbs up.
Yeah, I hope there is a market for it, man. I'm glad you brought up Sherlock, just to touch on briefly, because there's two different sides to Sherlock. There's the TV show Sherlock, which is very true to Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock, how he kind of was. He wasn't the Robert Downey Jr. action-packed, punching people, fighting his way to the mystery. And I think that's why that one, after the first one came out, it was kind of a novelty. Like, whoa, action hero Sherlock. That's different.
Yeah.
And then the next subsequent movies, I can't remember. Maybe there were two more after the first one. Just kind of, I mean, it's kind of why we don't have a conclusion to that franchise, because people they were like, it's just another action movie. But I think the reason why the show did so well is because Sherlock was just a mystery. It was just a hardcore mystery. It was a little darker, but it was just, who did it? How can we figure this out? You participate, like you said, as the audience in the movie. And so when it's just an action movie, you feel like someone sitting in a movie theater. But when it's Death on the Nile, you're in it. You're figuring it out. You're like, oh, I don't really trust what you just said, or that motive's a little weird, or you don't really have an alibi. So you kind of participate into it and in it, and that's what I really enjoyed about Death on the Nile, was that participation factor. And it was fun because my wife had read the book the week beforehand, so she was kind of cluing me in on the differences. Which, if those who have read the book, it didn't seem to really diminish the movie at all. They kind of combined some characters, because you can't have 15 characters on the screen.
Right.
But I also would give this a thumbs up. I think this is a great movie for a couple. I went out on Valentine's Day weekend. I think that was brilliant marketing, because the theater was packed, man. It was great to see a movie theater as jam-packed as it was for a weekend like that. And so I had a fun experience. I think that kind of added to it. It was a packed house, and we got our popcorn and our drink. And so I also give this a thumbs up. I think you should definitely, if you're into mysteries, go see this.
Yeah. And I think it's worth seeing, and I think it's worth giving it a shot, just to try to give more films success in our time and our eyeballs that don't have superheroes in them. If I just could give my 2 cents, because, what gets supported is what's going to be made. And if certain things don't get supported, certain phases will die out. And I'm not quite ready to see certain types of films go away, which is actually most. I don't want to see any type of film just disappear, right? I want there to be a wide variety of options. So I recommend seeing it. I recommend checking it out. Great date night movie, fun to talk about after it's done, and figuring out, if you can whisper back and forth to each other, like, hey, what do you think's gonna happen? Who do you think it is? Just don't annoy anyone too bad. So that's kind of my final thoughts. Thumbs up, check it out. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree. Get out there, support your local theaters, people. It's rough out there, so go show them some love, go show them some support, go see Death on the Nile.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to give us a thumbs up if you thought it was good. Let us know what you thought about the movie down below in the comments, but no spoilers, please. And we will talk to you next time on Parallel Quest. Bye-bye.